a big failure on the island. All the bees were dying, and they were dying for several reasons, but we didn't know what to do about that. So we came over, a friend of mine and I, at Randy Baird's request, and she's heading up the Island Bees program. And we did a little diagnosis. And what we found out was that it really wasn't because honeybees had a problem. It was really because beekeepers didn't know how to keep bees. There was a lack of instruction on keeping bees. Now, a lot of folks had bought books and so forth, but the problem with reading about honeybees today is that a lot of the material is outdated. It was dated back to a time before the Asian white or the Varroa mite came into the country and had destroyed the bee population. And so the methods used were traditional, but not necessarily contemporary. And so that became part of the problem. The other problem is that beekeeping is local. What we do to keep bees on Martha's Vineyard is very, very different than how we might keep bees in Georgia. There's a huge climatic difference. It's a little bit different than Rhode Island. I come from Rhode Island, and there are some things that we do in Rhode Island that are a tad different than what we would do here in Martha's Vineyard, as I find. And I'll give you a great example is that the temperature over in Rhode Island right now is about 12 degrees colder on average this time of the year. You have a great fall compared to what I have. And that works to your advantage because the bloom for the goldenrod and the asters goes much longer, and it's that goldenrod and aster bloom that's so critical to winter survival. That's the food source that the bees get for the winter. So you have that advantage. Your winter survival should be much higher than that of the mainland. Your disadvantage is the spring. Your spring comes later, and because it comes later, the bees have been dormant for so long that they have a sluggish startup period in the months of March and April. And that works against you, so you have to counteract that. So everything that is a little bit different depending on where you keep the bees, and we've had to learn how to compensate. Oh, sure, okay.
Can you hear me all right? Okay. William, are you ready? All right. The reason we're starting again is because part of what we're doing is videotaping this. So those who are interested in beekeeping, and there are a lot on the island, will have a chance to see this. And I'm thrilled with the number of you who are here. So what I'm going to do is simply introduce this as I would to you, but also to our viewing audience. So let me begin by saying welcome to this, the first of 5 demonstrations that we're going to have going on today. My name is Tad Crawford. I'm on the board of the Vineyard Conservation Society, and we are one of the founding organizers of this event, along with IGI, the Island Growing Initiative, BEP, the Vineyard Energy Project, and the Ag Society. We're thrilled to have you here. Our purpose in this event and what we do in the guise of living local is to promote and celebrate sustainable living here on the Vineyard. We want this to be a fun event for you, but we also want it to be a learning experience. We're hoping that as a result of this demo and others, that you'll go home with some very concrete, specific ideas about what you can do in your own lives and what you can do as members of this community to ensure that we are increasingly self-sufficient, a high bar to reach, and sustainable in the way in which we live here. We have a lot to learn from people who live close to the land. And all of the demonstrators this day are going to be people who you'll see live very close to the land. So let's begin. Everett is somebody who is known to most of you. What he'll be doing is talking about his bee school, his experience here on the island, the experience of those of you who are already beekeepers, and what are the lessons learned. And Everett, as you know, has been beekeeping most of his life. He owns the largest beekeeping farm on Rhode Island, and he has a passionate interest in education, which in fact is why he's here. We're very grateful that he's come. Thank you.
All right, thank you. What I'll do is I'm going to walk back and forth between that computer, and if you have any questions, please ask. I've got a second microphone here that I can pass to you so that others can hear your questions. And so,
Everett, please try to keep the mic.
I'll do the best I can, but it doesn't hurt to send me a signal that I'm not doing that. I get lost in myself sometimes. Okay, as Tad mentioned, I own BeeKeeping Apiary. I am the only commercial or professional beekeeper in Rhode Island. That's not hard to brag about. Rhode Island's not much bigger than Martha's Vineyard. My wife is here somewhere. She's a redhead, and when she comes in, we know her as misbehaving. Some of the services that my farm offers is crop pollination and beekeeper education. Very important to me on the educational side. On crop pollination, we actually take the bees and we go somewhere with them. We put them on the backs of trucks and we take them out to farms and we lease them to the farms for 2 or 3 weeks whilst the crop is in bloom, and then we go pick them up and we take them somewhere else. Ideally, we'd be doing this 3 times or 4 times a year. Renting those colonies out for 3 or 4 crops. In New England, it's tough because there aren't too many crops that allow us to do that. Not all crops require pollination by honeybees or insects for that matter, so there's not a lot available here. We have apples, blueberries, and cranberries primarily, and then if I get lucky, there are some vine crops that come up in July and August that I can put my bees out on. But vine cropping isn't all that a big pastime for farmers in New England, so I don't get a lot of that. But blueberries is big. Thanks. Blueberries is big as well as apples and so forth, and cranberries, of course. Products that I sell honeybees. I sell bee food for honeybees. Nutrition for honeybees is becoming a big deal lately. You would think, with as studied as this insect is, that we would know all there is to know about honeybee nutrition. And ironically, with all of the issues that we've had with honeybees, we are only now beginning to study nutrition from a science point of view. We've only been looking at this for the last 5 or 6 years with professional research with the university. So we really know very little about honeybee nutrition. We just took it for granted that they went out and they got nectar and they got pollen and everything would be okay. And so now we know better, so we're learning about that. They sell wholesale honey and bee supplies. Okay, this, as I mentioned earlier, this is a report card on how it went this summer. We took on a project last year to improve beekeeping skills amongst beekeepers on the island. So we had, for the very first time, a bee school. And folks came here, we were in the other room, and much to my delight, and I still admire this immensely, they sat on these metal chairs, you know those folding metal chairs? Well, they sat on these folding metal chairs. Now, because of the economics of coming back and forth to the island, we all agreed that we're just going to do this marathon style. We're going to start on Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Something that should normally have taken a good 6 weeks, and twice a week, maybe 3 hours a session. We're just going to do all in one shot. And we're going to do it from Friday night to Sunday afternoon. And to do that, we all had to sit on these awful folding metal chairs. So it didn't take long. Everybody's so resourceful. It didn't take long. By Saturday noontime or so, there were a lot of people bringing pillows and cushions and things like this to sit on. But it was great. The bee school went really well, at least in my opinion, went really well. To compensate for having to put 10 pounds of learning into a 5-pound bag, we agreed that we would come back monthly to do mentoring. That would be the compensation for trying to absorb too much material in a very short period of time. And so that's what we did. We came back and we looked at people's hives. We had workshops, and you'll see pictures of all that. I have photos of this whole activity. So we went all throughout the summer with hopes of having success, and the results came out. Now, we learned a lot. The teacher learned quite a bit too, and not everything went well. And some things were my error. Some of my errors were big errors, and I'll talk about those. And we had some surprises that we didn't count on, and we had some feedback from the local community. There are other beekeepers on the island besides our beekeepers, IGI beekeepers, and there are commercial beekeepers, professional beekeepers on the island, and we didn't have enough consultation with that group in the beginning. That was a mistake. We overlooked that. I think now they'll agree that we've repaired that. We have a much stronger dialogue going back and forth between the professional beekeepers and IGI. But that was an oversight on our part, so we missed that. So we fixed that, I think, as well. We're hoping to keep that dialogue alive. Just for those that are joining this for the very first time and didn't hear this last year, why do we need honeybees? The crop pollination primarily. It's nice to get honey, and we all like to have honey, But the reality of it is we need the honeybees for crop pollination. That's where they're of the biggest value to us. They go out and they pollinate. Some crops, like cranberries, cannot produce a berry unless there is some type of sexual reproduction pollination. And so we have that plant without an insect to pollinate it, there'd be no berries. Apples can do okay without insect pollination, but they do really well with insect pollination. Peaches don't need insect pollination as well, but they are enhanced by insect pollination. So there's a lot of things out there in our food chain that simply need to have the insects for pollination. Honeybees being the most efficient of the pollinators. There are other pollinators available, but honeybees are by far the most efficient of the pollinators. So that's the big contribution to agriculture. Can our native pollinators do the same job? Sure. Not only can they do the same job, but they do it really well. And that's one of the things that's of misunderstanding in the public's mind. You'll hear people say, and you'll see published and written sometimes, that without honeybees, 40% of our nation's food production would be in jeopardy. I don't know where that statistic comes from, but I don't believe that it's true. I do believe that in the short term, that there would be an impact on our nation's food supply. That there's no doubt, because we are so dependent on the commercialization of pollination services. So I have no doubt that in the beginning, if the bees were to stop all at once, that there would be an impact. I do believe, however, that that impact would fix itself with the native pollinators. And I'll give you a great example. Behind me is a picture of an almond orchard in California. The reason why we need honeybees to pollinate that orchard is because, like any grower, they strive to make sure that there are no wildflowers or weeds of any type in the soil around the orchard, competing with the nutrients that they need to grow the almond crop. And also, they have to keep the grass mowed so that they can get the crews in and out to pick the almonds and maintain the trees and everything else. So good ground cover management is a hallmark of a successful grower. So if you have 1,000 acres of almond trees and you've mowed it every single week and you've eliminated all the wildflowers, what are the native pollinators going to eat to survive? Nothing. There's nothing there for them. So you'll eliminate the native pollinators by having that great practice, and that's a practice that all growers strive for. And so we eliminate the native pollinators. To compensate for that, we have to bring in an insect. To take care of a crop density of that type of bloom, there's a lot of flowers just in that one photo. Can you imagine 100 acres or 500 acres of flowers like that? You need big populations of insects. Honeybees are the only insect that has that size of population. An average beehive contains maybe 30 or 45,000 bees at its peak when it's ready to pollinate. Sometimes it can contain as many as 60,000, but 30,000 would be a very realistic number in an average beehive. And so what we'll do is we'll bring those beehives in on pallets, put them down with tractors and bobcats and automated equipment, and we'll have a certain ratio that we follow. The USDA publishes ratios of 1 hive per acre, 2 hives per acre, or 4 hives per acre, depending on the crop. So we'll bring them in the middle of the night when the bees aren't flying, put them down in the daytime when the daylight first shows. They come out, they're in a brand new location, they start to orient, they find the flowers. And one of the things about honeybees is that this concept of floral fidelity, once they're on a bloom, they stay on that bloom until it's finished. So the first thing they see is almonds, or the first thing they see is cranberries, or the first thing they see is apples, and they go to it and they stay on it until it's done. And so that's the essence of crop pollination. But it's because of this dense cropping that we really need to manage honeybees. Here's a typical apple orchard, probably right here in Massachusetts. I snapped this picture at probably Holliston, that area. And again, it's the same thing. It's just a lot of trees, a lot of bloom, and well cared for, mowed aisleways that are devoid of flowers. Cranberries are another great example. Cranberries is one of our 2 native berries to New England. It grows here naturally. Cranberries were never meant to grow in that type of a dense setting, especially in water. They're actually a fairly dry root plant. The water is only there for harvesting. So they're not meant to grow in a swamp. So if you look for cranberries in the woods, you'll find them, but they don't grow so densely that they're easy to see. We've completely changed that in agriculture by making them grow in a very small area with lots and lots of bloom. To compensate for that, we have to put a lot of fertilizer, we have to get a lot of moisture, and we have to have insects to pollinate them, hence we bring the honeybees in. Okay, So humans need honeybees for our food supply. Well, that's not quite true. Humans need insects for our food supply. If the honeybees were to disappear altogether, we would have to find ways to encourage the native pollinators. And that's going to be a change in IGI's bee operation going forward next year. We're going to put a little more emphasis on native pollinators. That's what we've learned for lessons, and we'll talk about that later, but that's going to be an emerging theme now. We're going to look at native pollinators as well as honeybees. So you might ask, why is this little insect interested in helping us? Well, she really isn't. She doesn't really care about us. Like anything in wild, she's more interested in herself and also in her family and her brood. They're pretty much a communal colony. They're one of the only insect groups that communicate with each other. Ants being the other one that we know about. They are very social. And everything that the honeybee does is for the good of the colony. So they have one queen who's fertile. She's a female, obviously. She makes the babies. All of the other bees in the hive are predominantly female, 99% of them. Only about 300 are males. The women do all the work. That should come as no surprise to our audience here. They clean, they take care of the babies, they nurse, they forage, they bring the food in. All the things that have to happen in the hive, the honeybee women do it. And so they're out there gathering food, support the brood. They have very big populations. They have to gather an awful lot of food. How much food does it take? An average honeybee will forage in a 2.5-mile radius. 2.5 miles. Now, one of the things that we teach in the bee school in the first day is that if you have a yard with a garden, an acre garden or a 2-acre garden, 4 or 5 apple trees, maybe some peaches, and so forth, your bees will starve to death. There's just not enough food. They have to forage in a 2.5-mile radius. Within a good forage area, there's probably 5,000 or 8,000 acres in 2.5 square miles. That's what they need for forage. If that area is not is sparse and it doesn't have a lot of food available, then they will go out to 5 miles. They can reach a 5-mile radius if they need to. And in 5 miles, there's 13,000 acres. So that gives you an idea of this insect colony and how much food it needs and the impact that it has on the local ecology. But it's not just nectar that's interesting. Nectar draws them to the plant, but it's really the pollen that they're after. They use the pollen, that's their only source of protein. Bees need 2 things, carbohydrates and proteins. Carbohydrates give them the energy that they need to make heat, gives them the energy they need to fly, and it gives them the energy that they need to sustain life. But it's the proteins that are the building blocks of life. Without the proteins, they wouldn't be able to build muscle and wouldn't be able to have all the parts of the body that one needs from the protein building blocks. So pollen's really the key to this whole thing. And so another interesting thing comes up in the flowers themselves. Flowers need to be pollinated. If they weren't pollinated, they wouldn't be able to make seeds, and if they can't make seeds, then they can't regenerate themselves. So nature's got this thing going on about reproduction. The honeybees have to reproduce themselves in order to survive, and the flowers have to reproduce themselves in order to survive, and the 2 of them understand that they need each other. And so what happens is that flowers become colorful because colors attract honeybees and other types of insects, and they become sweet because sweet attracts insects. The nectars that they produce are really to attract the insects to them. And when the insects smell the nectar, the honeybee in particular, she flies to the flower and she tries to gather the nectar. She needs those carbohydrates for the brood back at home. In the process of doing that, she finds the pollen. Honeybees have hairs all over their bodies, so when they're going to get the nectar out of the flower, they pick up pollen grains on their bodies, and they don't like that because they can't fly well with all this pollen dust on them, so they pack it, they comb it off their bodies, they pack it into their legs in what we call pollen baskets, and they make this big load of pollen, sometimes the size of a very small pea, on each leg, and they fly that back to the hive. So now they have carbohydrates, and they have protein, and they bring this back to the hive, and it gets stored so that they can feed their brood. And the plant benefits because the bee going from flower to flower to flower carries the pollen grains that pollinate the flower. And so we have this nice little system of flowers competing for insects by making themselves bigger, sweeter, and prettier. And we have honeybees who are looking for food, going from flower to flower to flower, in the process pollinating the plants. So that's how pollination works. And that's a lesson in the birds and the bees. Okay, and there's a great example. That's a frame full of pollen. That's in the beehive. We have everything in wooden frames. And you can pull them out and inspect them, and that's a frame that has an awful lot of pollen on it. I just rubbed my hand to expose it, but well, that's a lot of pollen. Honeybees will consume about 4 pounds of pollen every month in the slow period, in the summer season, the reproductive period. They can consume as much as 4 pounds a week at a peak, but generally speaking, they average about 4 pounds of pollen per month. 4 pounds. Remember, pollen's nothing but dust. 4 pounds of dust is a lot. Okay, so what's bothering the bees? We'll touch on this basic way. Colony collapse disorder. Colony collapse disorder, thanks to Dave Hackenberg, a commercial beekeeper in Pennsylvania, in 2020, really made this famous. And you remember he has a voice that you can't forget. And Dave was on in 2020, and he was talking about the bees just disappearing. And that started the interest in beekeeping and everything. We have this resurgence of interest by the public in beekeeping and in honeybees. That was a very famous example of good media relations. 2020 got involved in that, they put it out there, and all of a sudden everybody wants honeybees. Everybody wants to help. Everybody is interested in the food supply, everybody's interested in buying honey. It's been great for beekeepers. The problem with colony collapse disorder and all of the media attention that it gets is that it's not as big of an issue systemically as for all beekeepers as it's made out to be. Colony collapse disorder is devastating to those who have been affected by colony collapse disorder. That there's no doubt. People like Dave Hackenberg who get hit with colony collapse disorder really suffer from it, and so I don't want to take that away. However, backyard beekeepers, if they have colony collapse disorder at all, hardly notice it if it even happens, because they might lose a hive or 2. But they aren't devastated by it because they only had a hive or 2 or 3, and they just restart the hive and everything's fine again. So colony collapse disorder really isn't the big impact that we've heard it to be, but it has been great because of the publicity and the fact that it calls our attention to the honeybees and the issues that beekeepers have as an agricultural pursuit. So we've getting a lot of attention on honeybees in the last 5 or 8 years, and that's been very good. Pesticides can be a really big issue depending on where you are. If you're in an area of dense crop farming, then you're going to have a pesticide problem, because the honeybees are little dust mops. They're out there dusting all of those flowers, bringing back pollen, and if the pollen has been exposed to pesticides, well, what is a pesticide meant to do? A pesticide's meant to kill insects. That's what it's there for. And so what's a bee? It's an insect. So the honeybees don't do well with pesticides. And the good news is that today, the awareness of the need for insect pollination, particularly honeybees, and the manufacturers of pesticides and our capabilities of chemical engineering are fantastic. So pesticides today are much more manageable than they have ever been in the history of using pesticides for crop management. They're way, way, way better than the days of DDT, as an example. But they're still lethal, and they're still deadly, and it's still a problem. So the honeybees are constantly bringing back perhaps contaminated food, and by the way, contaminated nectar, contaminated pollen. I don't know that it would be as big of an issue here on Martha's Vineyard. I don't know of any dense cropping going on here where there's a usage of pesticides at a level that would threaten any insect population, let alone honeybees. So it just depends on where you live. Certainly in Rhode Island, we don't have anywhere near this issue of pesticides as one might have perhaps in a state where there's a lot of dense cropping going on. So pesticides are an issue, but not that big of an issue. The one issue, there are 2 more things left that I think really are the biggest impact ever on honeybees. The varroa mite, without a doubt, changed the face of beekeeping. When the varroa mite came in 1985, it wiped out everybody. Backyard beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, sideline beekeepers, any bee colony available, the varroa mite found, and it devastated. To this day, the varroa mite is a problem for us. And it's the varroa mite that's the root of all evil. Control the varroa mite, and you have success in beekeeping. Without control of the varroa mite, your bees will die. And it's that simple. And a great example of that is that we have no bees in the wild anymore, no honeybees in the wild. Why? Because there's nobody controlling the varroa mite in the wild. The varroa mite right now in the balance of nature, everything is a balance of nature. Right now nature is favoring the varroa mite is winning. So that's really the issue. So varroa mite is devastating. It's much, much bigger than colony collapse disorder. It has been around for a lot longer than colony-class. Almost 30 years we've been dealing with this problem, and it just simply kills your bees. It's as simple as that. Have varroa mite, your bees are gone. There's nobody around, at least in the continental states, that does not have varroa mite. It's there, and that's the thing that we had to get across to the bee school. You have to do something about varroa mite. That was the big change in behavior. Now, varroa mite, as devastating as it is, and then, by the way, that's global. There's no place on Earth now that is varroa mite free. It used to be Hawaii was, but I now understand that varroa mite has infiltrated the islands about 3 years back. New Zealand, I think, was mite free. I don't know if it may still be. But that's about it. Everywhere else in the globe, there's varroa mite and it's killing your honeybees. Now, that's huge. But I think the biggest killer of honeybees is the beekeeper. And why? Because it's beekeeping practices. If we adopt an outlook that says we don't need to do anything about the mite, we're going to kill our bees. You would be surprised how many beekeepers are in denial that they have a mite problem. They're in denial that the mite is a problem. It just flabbergasts me. I've lived through this whole thing for the last 40 years, and I live the mites every day of the week. And the difference between success, beekeepers who are keeping their bees year in and year out without issue, and failure, beekeepers who are losing their bees every 12 to 18 months, is simply the varroa mite. And we take beekeepers who are losing their bees constantly, we teach them how to control the varroa mite, and everything is fine. So you might wonder, why then is there such denial? Why then is there such resistance controlling the varroa mite? It just seems so obvious, just do it. And the answer is because it's an insect. And so how do you control insects? Pesticides. How do you kill a little insect in the presence of a big insect? Very, very difficult. And so the beginning approach to controlling varroa mite back in the 1980s and early 1990s was by the use of pesticides. They searched for pesticides that would kill the mite and not the bee. And they were somewhat successful. They found pesticides that would kill the mite and only the bee a little bit. And of course that means that one has to have a lot of discipline. If you're going to kill the bee a little bit, then you have to be very disciplined about how you kill. A little bit. Most people don't take the time. Most growers don't have the time. Most beekeepers who are in commercial operations don't pay attention because of the time constraints. And so we'll put a little bit on. The bees are still not doing well. Let's put a little more. And a little more. And after a while, we had overexposure to fluvalinate, which is a pesticide used to kill mites. We're the only ones in the industry that use it. When Penn State did the study of residual pesticides in the beeswax and the bee comb, they found that the top 3 pesticides, to our chagrin, were the only pesticides, the only people that use those pesticides were beekeepers, not commercial farmers. Everybody was ready to blame the big farms. That would have been great. Just you, stop using the neonicotinoids. You're the blame because you're using the synthetic pyrethroids. No, it was the stuff that we were using that was in the comb in high percentages. We were killing our own bees. And that's only a few years back that study was done. I think maybe just 5 years back. So you can see the impact of our own practices, and that's one of the things that education is very important about. And then there's just plain, I don't know how to keep bees. I'm just going to buy bees, they're insects, put them in a box, you stick them outside, and in the fall you go collect the honey and take it to the farmer's market and you're all set. That's a very common outlook on honeybees for backyard beekeepers. They read a book, Beekeeping for Dummies, which is very good, by the way. They read it, they put it away, they buy the bees, they forgot about the book, they get busy, they forget about the bees, and then they have a problem with bees and the bees die, particularly over the winter time. Winter is not the killer of honeybees. Winter is the exacerbation of the bee's demise. Winter is a stressful time of the year for any insect or any living thing, us included, and so the winter takes its toll on the beehive. If the bees go into the winter healthy, they come out of the winter beautiful. If they go into the winter sick, they die. Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's look at a year of beekeeping on Martha's Vineyard, then we'll do the report card. This is all photos. Now, when I started this, just to reiterate, there was a problem the year before, and maybe the year before that. I sell honeybees, and I got fortunate that Martha's Vineyard took an interest in me. And we were shipping a lot of honeybee colonies to Martha's Vineyard. And I stand behind my bees, and so I tell folks, if your bees die within a reasonable period of time, all you have to do is call, and I'll give you more bees. If I don't have bees to give you because if you call too late, it's too late in the season, I'll give you new bees next year. And that's just my promise to beekeepers. So what had happened was that we had sent a lot of bee colonies over here to Martha's Vineyard in April, or maybe it was May, but it was that time of the period. And within a week or 2 or 3, I was getting phone calls. And my bees are dying, or my bees are gone. I was hearing my bees are gone, and I started thinking colony collapses. So, oh my God, it's a small place, contained 10 by 10, ocean all around. I wonder if there's a colony collapses sort of problem on Martha's Vineyard. It didn't seem likely. I called the state. I asked the state agriculturalist, and asked Al, I said, what do you think? He says, gee, I don't think so. But it's possible. Everything's possible. But he was skeptical. I called my own state agriculturist, Jim Lawson, and asked Jim the same question. And Jim just says, yeah, I just don't believe it, but maybe. They said, you better go over and find out what's going on, because we were shipping replacement colonies. And it's unusual. I saw honeybees all over New England, and Martha's Vineyard was the only one calling with any kind of numbers. I mean, people call me all the time. Here and there, I get 1 or 2, and I'm always suspect as to whether the bees had a problem or the beekeeper just made a mistake when they put the bees in their hive. But I'm willing to work with it. But Martha's Vineyard, it was reaching 60 and 70% of the colonies that we ship, all in a 3-week period. Something was wrong. So we got on the ferry, and we came over and we visited everybody, and we figured it out within 2.5 hours. You guys didn't know what you're doing. It was as easy as that. I was flabbergasted. I've seen some crazy things, but this was crazy. And so we said, okay, we're going to replace those bees, but you have to promise to go to bee school. And the folks would say to me, well, we don't have a bee school. We've never had one. Okay, great. So now we got to solve that problem too. So we'll have a bee school, but you got to promise to go. And if you go, I'll give you new bees. It's too late now anyway. We have to replace them next spring. So my commitment to the beekeepers was that we would have a bee school, and then we would have more bees, and we would monitor that and see what happened. So that's how we're here today. That was my pitch last year. This is the report card. So here's the bee school, was in that other room, and you can see everybody was fast. I can't get over how everybody sat there. I hate marathon learning sessions. I hate them with a passion. I don't even, it was a miracle that I even signed up for it, because let alone do I not like it to be in the audience. I can't imagine inflicting that kind of pain on everybody. But they did it. I couldn't believe it. They did it, and they were so enthusiastic about it. And it was just great. So there I am, there's me droning on, so to speak. And look at that level of interest. That's Sunday. By the time we were passing out props, it was Sunday. Unbelievable. Everybody went home, they bought equipment, they put it together, and they ordered bees, and then we waited. And we did the bee school rather late in the season. Normally we do bee schools in February. This one we did, what was it?
April 1st.
April 1st? Oh, April 1st. Yeah, who was the fool giving the bee school? We did this on April 1st. So the bees were going to come shortly, so we only had to wait a little bit. Normally you go to bee school in February, you wait for a long period of time. Everybody, you had to buy all this stuff and get it all put together. Bee stuff does not come assembled. So one of the skills you learn in bee school is how to put stuff together, nailing and screwing and all that sort of stuff. And so they did. They assembled, and there's a lot of little parts in the bee, a lot more than you would imagine. But they did. They bought it, they got it in, and they got it all assembled, and they were ready, and they were waiting for me, and we were waiting for the bees. The bees came. This is my place in Smithfield. The bees came on the back of a big truck. To get bees at this level of population in April, we have to go south. Most of the bee colonies in the country are produced in Georgia and south. Georgia's a big area. Florida's the next biggest area. So we have a farm down there that supports us, and we got these are colonies of bees. Every one of those boxes is a separate colony. They pack them onto pallets like that, put them on the back of a big truck, and head up to Rhode Island. So these bees arrived, and I don't remember what day it was. That was a whole blur because of all the rain that we had. Oh, look at the mud. That's what we were dealing with. Get them off the truck and into the mud on the ground. And now because we brought the bees in from somewhere else, every state in the country says that if you bring bees in on comb, in other words, a live colony on comb, they must be inspected for health issues. Honeybees have health problems, and they need to be inspected to make sure that they're not unhealthy. And so we put them all on the ground, and we waited for Jim Lawson, who's that one guy right back there. And poor Jim Lawson had to inspect every one of these bee colonies, and so he did. I've got the sign, I got 15 minutes, perfect, okay. There he is. Now, as we start to open the boxes and the weather starts to warm up, you got bees everywhere. That's why we wear our bee veils. Normally honeybees are fairly gentle. We'll talk about that, not always, but normally they're fairly gentle. And if you didn't wear your bee veil with that type of colony density, and bees getting out for the first time after being on the road for 3-4 days from a different state, they're out, they're curious, they need to go to the bathroom, and they're foraging, and all of these things are looking for water. If you breathe, you're going to swallow a bee. So you wear your bee veil to keep from swallowing bees primarily. They're not happy either. Okay, so we got them all inspected. Counted out the bees. You know, not all of those bees came to Martha's Vineyard. About 75 or 80 of those colonies came to Martha's Vineyard. So we counted them all out, we segregated them. These are the ones we want to take to the vineyard. There was nothing special about that. It was just the first group that I could get my hands on. We put them all onto a pallet, stuck them on the back of my other truck, and got on the ferry and came over. And this is over here at co-housing. They're all stacked up. The best time to pick up your bees is first thing in the morning. They're not flying. It was chilly back then, so they were cold, and they were inside staying warm. So we encouraged the beekeepers to come down early, and we screened the entrances in so the bees wouldn't fly. So everybody came. Now that was going to be our first workshop. We were going to teach folks how to take the bees out of that box and put them into their own permanent hives, their own permanent homes. So we did. We had a workshop at co-housing that morning. And there I am, I'm showing all the beekeepers, how do you get them out? You take them out like this and you put them in like that, basically. So they came to that workshop. And we got a chance to look at the bees, and it was the first time that the beekeepers from the bee school had actually handled the bees, unless they had bees from the year before. We taught them how to light their smoker. A smoker is a very important beekeeping tool. It helps to calm the bees, so we taught them how to light their smokers, how to use the hive tool, which is our #1 tool for prying and opening. And queen introduction, if you have to introduce a queen, this is how you would do it, because sometimes queens need to be replaced. And mite testing. Mite testing, very, very important. We actually did a separate workshop on this, but there's a way of testing for the mite, and that's very, very important. We all know we have mites. That's not the issue. The issue is what method of control do you use to control mites? And that's why beekeepers are reluctant to do mites, because a lot of us don't want to use pesticides in that hive. There are a lot of other control methods. All I say to beekeepers is, learn to control the mite. However you want to do that. There are many, many, many good methods of controlling those mites that don't need to use pesticides to do it. And so the key is, when do you control and to what extent? To what level of you know, how it's called the big guns. How big of a gun do I take out to kill this problem? Well, you make that decision by counting the mites. So there's a sampling methodology that we taught. You sample on a regular basis, say once every 3 weeks or once per month. You count the mites in your sample, and if you have it under control, the count won't change. It'll be up or down a bit. But if it's not under control, it's going to skyrocket. When you start to see it skyrocketing, you have to do something stronger than you were doing before. If it's holding steady, then you can continue what you were doing before. That was the big skill that we wanted to get across to this bee school. And so we came over, we showed how to count mites. And there's a sample, and there's all the little mites in the bottom of the jar. They're looking down into a mason jar, and you can see the little spots, and those little spots are the mites. They have an idea how hard they are to find. So what was happening was beekeepers would pull out the frame in their hive. They would have 1,000 bees on a frame, 500 bees. And I know other beekeepers that did the bee school who have bees are laughing, because they know when you pull out this lot of bees. And you're looking for this tiny little speck in the turgid plates underneath the scales of the bee. They lodge underneath in the turgid plates. Most of us assumed prior to that they were just crawling on the top of the bees, and all you would have to do is look, and there they would be. But you really don't. You have to turn the bee upside down. You have to bend back its abdomen and look under the turgid plates. Now, I'm not even good at that, so I can't imagine a beginning beekeeper even trying to do that. It's much better to use alcohol. You wash a sample of 100 bees in alcohol, and you wash them off, and then you just count them in the bottom of a jar, and it's far more reliable and easier to do. So everybody was surprised to see that they had mites, and they were right on time. The mite counts at that time of year were right where they were supposed to be.
Do you have time for a question?
They give me the hook. So, Sarah had a question. We also brought the program to the high school, and these are high school boys that are very interested in beekeeping. But we also had girls sign up for it too. So we had high school girls and high school boys, and I was really happy to support the charter school and the high school. So we had 2 schools going, and they were very good. Okay, and then we are teaching high school. Finally, we were successful. We did a report card tour about 2 weeks ago. We visited all the hives that we could possibly visit, and big change from last year. The bees were surviving, they were thriving. Not all of them were perfect. We had any normal bell curve. You had some bad, some extremely good. But on average, everything was fine. The big problem that we found was that the bees were starving to death because of the lack of goldenrod bloom or proficiency in the goldenrod bloom. So something was wrong with the nectar flow at that time. It may have picked up since I've been here 2 weeks ago, because I know it picked up in Rhode Island. So we told the beekeeper, you're gonna have to feed. You have to feed them sugar syrup so they can survive. And so beekeepers are all feeding right now. Those who were feeding, the hives were much better condition. That's what extracting honey looks like. You have these frames of honey, you put them into an extractor, you spin it, out comes the honey. So much fun. IGI has an extractor that you can rent or borrow. I don't know how it works, but they have one, you don't need to buy one. Okay, early indicators show that the bee school and the mentoring practice that we did, the mentoring workshops, had a very positive impact, night and day, compared to last year. That was one of the good things. We also found out that nature was working against us this fall. We were in a starvation and we needed to feed. So that wasn't that great. But the good news is that mites everywhere were under control. Everybody was very diligent about that. So we were either applying controls during that tour, or we were complimenting beekeepers who had already applied controls. But nonetheless, we were under control, and that was really the big thing. Not everything went as planned. We had a queen honeybee quality problem. We had bad queens. We had duds, and we had to replace them. So we shipped a bunch of queens over, and beekeepers had to replace them. And we had nasty bees. That was a total curveball for me. Honeybees are normally gentle and easy to handle. Not that you won't get stung, you will get stung, but they're not normally a problem. Okay, we had several colonies of bees on the island that I brought over that were just plain nasty. And nastiness is a genetic condition. It's easy to fix. You just change the queen, and then you have better bees. But in the process, though, it was just plain nasty. It was a bad experience for beginning beekeepers. And to those beekeepers, I apologize. I didn't realize that was going to happen. It's one of the curveballs of working with livestock. So, well, we fixed it, and we're still fixing it. I'm looking at a couple people and say, "Yeah, you fixed it." We are working on it. The big surprise, the thing that none of us thought about, I didn't think about particularly, I should have thought about it, is how many bees can a 10x10 island support? Okay, that really made us stop and think. It was Tim Cohen who brought this up. He said, gee, he says, how many colonies you guys bringing over here anyway? Tim's been a big supporter of the program, but I didn't think of that. And so we stopped and said, I don't know. And we asked the state of Massachusetts, how many colonies per square mile can you support? They didn't know. Nobody has these statistics. There's an entomologist who's doing research on native pollinators on the island. We found him. We asked him about his research. He's been doing it for, I think, 5 or 6 years or maybe longer, counting the native pollinators. And he wasn't sure either, but he offered to help us in that as we go forward, if we're overloading, we should see more honeybees in his samples. He's out there with traps, trapping insects, and honeybees should start showing up. So we have that going for us. But this is a really big concern. We can't take this too lightly. We can't just all have bees. That's going to be a big problem. So we're thinking about that. Because of that, we agonized over whether we should hold another bee school. Should we just let this go unleashed and through enthusiastic talks like this, encourage people to take bees, and then they come and they have bees. The next thing we go from 300 colonies of bees on the island to 600 to 1,000 to 1,200, and then all of a sudden a disease develops, it goes through the island like wildfire, and everybody's bees die. And worse, we may create a condition where we can't have bees on Martha's Vineyard for another 10 years until the disease works its way out of the system. That becomes a big concern. So what we're doing now is we're modifying our approach a little bit. But the flip side is that we don't want to not have the bee school and then go back to where we were before, where people were just bringing bees in, becoming discouraged by them, leaving them out in the wild, not even picking up the equipment, and causing a disease problem that way. So we don't want to do that either. We want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So yeah, we're going to hold the bee school, but when we do the bee school, we're going to talk about how many colonies can we support. And in the process of the bee school, we'll encourage folks to keep bees together. Community bees, 2 or 3 people keeping 2 or 3 hives instead of 6 hives each. And have some kind of a registry where we know what the count is. So that we'll maintain about 100 hives at IGI, through the mentoring program, and that's about it. And so as people drop, we add people in, and like that. So we'll have some kind of a method like that. So if you want to be part of the mentoring program, we're going to have a finite level that we're going to support. All with this idea of responsible beekeeping. Let's not overdo it. Okay, and then we're going to look at promoting and supporting and cultivating native pollinators. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I'm very interested in this. I want to learn this skill. How do we make the native pollinator population on Martha's Vineyard stronger? You know, what can we do for that? So it's an alternative to keeping bees. Maybe we just need to keep wildflower strips, garden patches, maybe half-acre wildflower on the border crops on farms and things like that. Maybe that's all we need to do to keep the native pollination going. We'll find out. We'll get some help from the Soil Conservation Service. They have lots of program on native pollination, so we'll get some help from them. So we updated the IGI mission statement. The Island Grown Bees program educates our community, and especially our beekeepers, about the importance of bee pollination and the role that beekeepers play in responsible beekeeping. Our goal is to promote both natural pollinator habitat and honeybee beekeeping to achieve a balanced approach to insect pollination on Martha's Vineyard. If we could pull that off, wouldn't it be great? Everybody learns. So we'll see what next year's learning brings us. Thank you for sitting in these hard benches.
I'm curious if there's any reason not to just dust every 2 weeks, whether you're mites or not.
Dusting with powdered sugar is a mite control method that we teach beekeepers. The idea that if we make the bees slippery and we make them want to clean themselves, they'll dislodge the mites. They fall to the bottom of the hive, the mites do. And we have a screen on the bottom. They fall through the screen and perish as they hit the ground. Once they're on the ground, they can't live. It's a very effective control. The problem with powdered sugar dusting is that it's not as effective as it needs to be. Sooner or later, the mite population will outrun powdered sugar dusting. Powdered sugar dusting works great, though, for holding it down during the slow months. But during heavy brood production, the mite population will outrun powdered sugar dusting, and we have to do something heavier. But if we do at least that, and then it either eliminates the need or at least reduces the need to do something stronger by way of mite control. And that's why you're counting. Your powdered sugar program may be working just fine this year. Next year you may have to take some stronger action, and then you might be fine for another year. Counting's the key, so we know what's happening.
So, don't we owe a great debt of gratitude to Everett for coming here? And what's so impressive is to hear him talking about responsible beekeeping on the island, taking into account our own reality.